This
please,
conference will now be recorded.
to share my screen. Okay, all right, let me start sharing my screen. I don't think I got the organized access. Just give me a moment. Okay, can you all see my screen?
No.
Yeah.
Now, yes.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
now, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we are able to.
Okay, all right. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the flow charts and um, how do we go about creating the flow chart and what are the advantages of having the flow chart, and then we'll look at few examples and with which so the idea is basically about we'll start identifying um, I will start identifying the stakeholders and their responsibilities and so on. So how do we document this flowchart as part of the requirement documentation and so on? So we'll have a look at in today's session. When I talk about flowchart, so all of us know that so how we have all studied flowchart, the flow diagram during our schooling and schooling as part of our studies. So basically, the idea here is that the flowcharts are used as part of our documentation, the whether it is PRD or FRD documentation to understand the workflow, where the sequence of things that are done in a particular logical order, so that can be represented by using the flowcharts. So a flowchart is basically a diagrammatic representation that illustrates the sequence of operations to be performed to get the solution of a problem. To get the solution of a problem, generally drawn in the early stages of documenting the requirements. Generally drawn in the early stages of documenting the requirement. Facilitate the communication between the programmers and business people are the end users. It facilitates the communication between the programmers, business people are the end users of the system. So the flow chart is just a diagrammatic representation, and that would be useful for illustrating the sequence of activities that would be performed to get the solution of a problem. So the purpose of having the flow chart, so define and analyze the process. So especially if there is a like process flow, for example, uh, like if we have raised a claim request for the insurance claim request, so what are all the various stages in which it will pass through before the claim got settled? So obviously there will be a number of different levels where the claim would go for the review, and after all the review, and the doctor would be also looking at the claim documentation and the respective treatment that's been given to the patient and so on. Once all of that is done, then the approval process will be followed, right? So, sorry, the approval, this claim settlement would be followed. So obviously there is a set of sequence of things, a set of sequence of activities, and maybe like if you look at on a broader perspective, there will be a number of systems involved all during this process, right? So when we raise a claim request, obviously the person sitting out over there, they will scan the document and upload to the system. So from there on, it will go to the different departments and they will look at the things and if needed, they'll ask for the additional documentation. It will go through the different systems, through the different approval process. So that's where the process were involved. So that's where to define the process for an organization, we use the flowchart. So build a step-by-step picture of the process for analysis, discussion, or communication. In order to discuss these things, analyze these things for further communication, that is when we also use the flowchart. Build a step-by-step picture of the process for analysis, discussion, or communication. Define, standardize, or find areas for improvement in a process. So in an existing process, if you want to showcase like where we can point out and where we can do the improvement. So in order to define, standardize, or find areas for improvement in existing process, that's when we use the flowchart. So if you look at the symbols, like what are all the symbols that we generally use? There are many symbols, in fact, but we are not this is not about expertise of creating the flowchart. It's about how we should be able to make sense by using this flowchart to the respective team members. So if you look at the flowchart, the symbols, the major symbols are listed out here. The start or end of the program. So if you initiate a flowchart, so the start or end of the program is represented by eclipse or the oval. Eclipse or the oval. Input output operation, parallelogram. So whatever that you give as input to the system, whatever that you expect the output from the system, that we define as the parallelogram. And computational step or process, any process related, activity related thing, that we put it in rectangle. The most widely used symbol out of all this is the rectangle. And then we have the decision making box. So rhombus is the decision making box where there is a decision like a if condition kind of thing, where if the decision is right, if the condition is true, or I would say rather than decision, it's a condition box. If the condition is true, you will have one flow. If the condition is false, you will have the other flow. Then you have the connector. So the circle is the connector. So when do we use the connector? So if you want to pause the workflow in one of the pages and restart it somewhere else, in a different page, that's when you use a connector. Flow lines are the direction. The arrow marks represents the flow lines are the direction. The arrow mark represents the flow lines are the direction. In which direction the workflow is happening. In which direction the workflow is happening. That is represented by the flow lines are the direction. So that way, if you talk about the symbols here, so you have the symbols like the start or end of the program, input output operation, computational step of process, and then decision making, connector, and flow lines are the direction. So the guidelines. So when we create flowcharts as part of our documentation, what all things that we need to remember? So first thing is all the necessary requirements should be listed out in logical order. So especially like when we have to create it, so when we identify the system like workflow related things at the initial stages of the project activity, at the initial stages when you identify the requirements or when you identify the workflow, so that's when you may need to present it to your teams and you may need to communicate with your team. Or if you want to define a process for the system which is recently developed, so that's when you use that. So for that to happen correctly, first and foremost thing is all the necessary requirements should be listed out in the logical sequence or the logical order. The flowchart should be clear, neat, and easy to follow. The usual direction of flow is from left to right or top to bottom. So if you look at the usual direction, that's from left to right or top to bottom. So that would be the usual direction of the workflow in general. So the advantages, so the whole purpose of having the flow chart is for better communication. So as a BA, we need to define the requirements to our own development testing teams, the project managers, and also we need to communicate the process further. Like we need to communicate the system, how it works, how the workflow would be happening to the business team. So obviously, flowcharts are a better way of communicating the logic of the system to all the concerned people. The better way of communicating the logic of system to all the concerned people. Effective analysis with the help of flowchart problem can be analyzed in more effective way. So if you have a flowchart defined already for an existing system, you can exactly pinpoint where the issue is. If at all if there is any issue, you can pinpoint and say that we are facing the issue in this particular step and so on. Proper documentation. Program flowcharts serve as good program documentation, which is needed for various purposes. The program flowcharts serve as good program documentation, which is needed for various purposes. This is majorly for so flowchart good as program documentation, which is needed for various purposes. So that means that we use it as part of the requirement documentation that will be helpful for the development activity. Efficient coding, the flowcharts act as a guide or blueprint during the system analysis and program development phase. So, especially for the development team, so they want to look at all the possible uh, outcomes of what they are writing, like what the piece of code does. So, whether they are covering all the possible scenarios or not, that would be basically be analyzed by using a flowchart. So the flowcharts act as a guide or blueprint during the system analysis and program development phase. So the examples that we would be looking at is withdrawal of cash from the ATM machine. So we would be looking at withdrawal process, which we are very much aware of. All that the idea is we would be learning the tool here. So we need to know how to use that tool. Then we will look at the recruitment process, how it happens in the organization. So who are all the people who would be involved in, and what exactly, where exactly it will start, and what are all the different stages it will pass through before getting the person onboarded in the organization. We'll have a look at that in the next step. So the first and foremost thing is that so we would be looking at the cash withdrawal process from the ATM machine. So how what is the workflow that needs to be followed in order to withdraw the cash from the ATM machine? So let's have a look at it. So the tool that we use for that is Microsoft Visio, or we call it as MS Visio. Okay, so Visio is one of the tools that we use for various types of diagrams. Various types of diagrams. So, like if you see, if you go to, let me just, okay, let me before that. Okay, so if you see here, network related diagrams, flowchart related software, business database related diagrams. So now if you see here, there is different types of diagrams that you can see out here. So not all diagrams are important for us, or we won't be using it. Like there is a brainstorming diagram, basic flowchart, organizational chart, and cross-functional flowchart, and workflow diagrams. Office layout and all it is not very much important for us. So data flow diagrams, that's one other thing. And also one other thing that we use is so wireframes diagram. So the one the other day I was telling you, like someone has asked me, if we don't have a system, if you have to create a design of a web page, how do we do it? So obviously, like you have wireframes uh, design by using Microsoft Visio. So you can go there and you can create the screen the way you want, and you can copy paste in your requirement documentation. So that way you have like many such diagrams. Let me just see. Okay, so under software, so if you see that, so this is basically UML class diagram and data flow diagram, enterprise application, data flow model diagram, and wireframes, and then UML database notation, UML sequence diagram, UML activity diagram. So UML diagrams are unified modeling language diagrams. So UML use case diagrams, UML use case diagrams, and so on. So sequence diagram, activity diagram, use case diagram, these are all things that we study in the next few sessions as part of our training. So we'll be going through it. So, and these are used as part of our requirement documentation. So apart from the software ones, like if you talk about flowchart, again there are different types of flowchart. So for us, like not very important to look at all of the stuff, but the basic flowchart diagram that should be enough for us. And apart from that, so you have networking diagram, that's not that important. Education, business, database. Like database, and a database, probably you have data flow diagrams. So which is again one of the important things, where the data is stored and how it is stored and what is the relationship between the data. So the database model diagram, these are the important ones. So all that, in order to use these diagrams, you just need to click on the diagram, and the moment you click on create, it will open a page something like this, where you have all the basic shapes that are defined on the left hand side. So as I mentioned, there are a number of different symbols, a number of different symbols. So, but again, start or end of the program, and the decision box, and the process, and document, database related, and all these things we can see. And you have like arrow marks, and then so from here again different diagrams that you see. So the basic flowchart shape. So these are the basic ones that we use. So if you look at here, so this is the location where we would be creating the diagram. Okay. The first and foremost thing is, in order to withdraw the cash from the ATM machine. So what are all the steps that we follow? What would be the first step that we do?
Input.
Sorry,
Enter card.
insert the card into the ATM machine. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So insert the card. Then
Pin. Then pin. Security pin. Yeah.
Enter pin.
enter the PIN. Okay. So what would be the next step?
There should be an exception
Select
like
the
correct.
amount or account.
Huh?
Enter the
Sorry?
accounts.
Select the bank, which bank, then what account it is.
Account. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Type of account, savings account, or whatever. So we'll go with the basic flow. So assume that we have only the savings account with the bank, no other type of account.
There would be a
Okay.
validation. There would be a
Okay.
validation like yes or no. So if the PIN number is correct, then it will go for the cash withdrawal. And if the PIN
Mm-hmm.
number is, then it's go to the exception, error exception.
Okay. Cool. Yes. So there is a decision kind of thing. That means a validation. Decision is nothing but the validation. So that validation is basically, once we enter the PIN and insert the card, the system would read the card and the corresponding PIN and see if the details are matching in the database. If the details are matching in the database.
Kiran, I have a doubt. Like just now it got disconnected. So how did you enter into the screen? Like did you download this Vision Professional or something like that? Or
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Microsoft Visio tool I have downloaded. I had downloaded the Microsoft Visio tool, and there is like the older versions also available. For 2006, there is until 2016, there is
Okay.
2007 version also available. So you can try out in torrents. If there is a version available, you can probably download it. If at all, if you face any issue, please let me know. I can check from my side.
Yeah.
I Yeah, I can provide you that. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
No problem. So yes, so basically this tool is not only used for the basic flow, not only used for the flow chart. There are a number of other diagrams we can use, and all of these diagrams are sensible, especially when we are documenting the requirement and communicating the requirement with the stakeholders. So is the entered pin correct? So that is the next thing, that the validation that the system does, right? Okay, so someone said this one, right? So the validation is definitely done. So without which obviously the system will not accept the further steps. So the validation would be done with your card and the entered pin. So what would be the next step now? So if it is S, so
Account is
someone said
selected.
it will go. So someone said that it will go to the further processing and so on. What if it is not correct?
Then it
Input pin again. So
Select
we
the
will
account type.
again. Okay, so no, if it is not correct, if the pin is not
Uh,
correct, what
it
would be
will
the next step? Mhm. Someone said we need to re-enter the pin. Yes. Okay, so what would be the next symbol here, and what would be the text? So obviously there is a limitation, right? You cannot enter the pin as many times as you want, right? There is a limitation, right? So obviously, like, so we cannot directly connect it to enter pin. So if we are connecting to enter pin the next moment, there is no limitation that the user can enter as many times as possible. Sorry, as many times as he wants. So in case if the entered pin is incorrect, that's not the case, right? In reality, there is a limitation. So what would be the next step here? So the thing is that obviously the system would count how many times you are entering the pin. The system would count how many times you are entering the pin. So obviously the system would check whether the number of attempts are greater. How many times we can re-enter the pin?
3 times.
3 times. Yeah. So the system will validate, are the number of attempts greater than 3? If it is less than or equal to 3, so in that case you will be asked to re-enter the pin. So what will happen if it is more than 3 times? You tried more than 3 consecutive times,
Blocked.
the
This will
wrong process.
block the pin.
Block
It's
the
blocked.
card.
Okay, your card gets blocked, and there are different banks follow different process, but in general, your card is blocked. Reach out to nearest branch for unblock process. Or some cards are reactivated after 1 day or something of that sort. So card unblock process we are not very much interested in. So coming to different page. So just taking. Okay, so we are not interested in card unblock process. That is not the idea here. So obviously, I am putting a unpage reference. So in case if I want to discuss the same, so I would be starting the next page, or like in a different page, I will start off with the same symbol and the same text, same symbol and the same text. So that's going to be the connectivity. So that means that I am pausing the workflow here, and I'm going to restart in a different page. That's when we use this symbol, on page reference symbol. Okay, right. So in case if the number of atoms are greater than 3, your card gets blocked. If the number of atoms are less than or equal to 3, you'll be given option to re-enter the pin. So you can re-enter the pin, and the system will again validate whether you are entering correctly or not. Okay, so let's go to the positive flow. So once your entered PIN is correct, right? So once the entered PIN is correct, so what would be the next step? Next
Select the
thing.
type of account.
Select the type of.
Account.
Okay, so we are not worrying about the type of account. So we just assume that only one type of account we are handling, because the process is going to be same whether you follow a savings account or
Then,
current account or what.
so then next step would be the cash withdrawal or deposit the cash or deposit the check
Okay,
amount.
so
Yeah.
okay, cool. So you'll see a number of options on the screen: the balance inquiry, cash withdrawal, and mini statement, and then you have funds transfer, something of that sort. You'll see a
Right.
number of options. So
Options.
the user, we are interested in cash withdrawal. Obviously, the user would
Cash withdrawal.
click on
And, s-
withdrawal,
and select the amount.
withdrawal. Yeah. So once they click on withdrawal, the system would prompt you to enter the amount. The user would enter the amount. Okay. So enter the amount. So what will happen next, and what would be the next symbol here?
So here again,
Print
one
receipt.
we applied, like the amount is exists the means if the user's amount is means users the amount a user entered is already in his account or not, that kind of
Okay.
validation.
Yeah. Yeah.
The system will validate whether you have enough balance in your account, right?
Yes.
So in order
Yes.
to withdraw, so
Right.
whether you have enough balance in your account or not, that's another validation that is done. So is the entered amount greater than available balance?
Also,
Available
there will
balance.
be a withdrawal limit
So there
for
is a
each
withdrawal
account.
limit. So, but again, so the withdrawal limit is different for different bank, especially different for different banks and also different locations, region-wise, right? So that's again configurable thing. It's not the same for every bank, or it's not same in every region, right? So it
Yeah.
changes. So it's a configurable thing in the system. It's not nothing to do with the business logic. But here, whatever that we are mentioning in these things, right? What are the conditions without which the ATM machine itself will not work? Without these validations, without PIN validation, without the number of attempts validation, without this amount validation, the ATM machine itself will not work.
Yes.
Again, the limits itself is again specific to the region, specific to bank and all that, specific to the type of account and all that.
Okay.
So that is a configurable thing in the system. So that is anyway. So that is if you want to add multiple things, that is again. So you can make this as complex as possible. That should not be a problem. Okay, we want to just have a basic flow here. So if the entered amount is greater than available balance, if I am trying to withdraw $1,000 while I have only $500 in my account, so
So
what will happen in that case?
it will show message that not the enough balance in your account.
The
Instead,
insufficient funds.
yes.
Please re-enter the amount.
Yes.
So it will give you option amount. So anyway, we can connect these two things. So that is again the validation will anyway will happen. So if at all the entered amount is within the limits or within the balance, like whatever that the person have or the customer have. So in that case, obviously the system will dispense the cash and the user would collect the card. And with that, the process comes to an end. So our whole idea is to withdraw the cash from the ATM machine. With that, the process comes to an end. Okay. So now that we have created the flowchart, we need to basically link all these symbols. Only then it will be a complete one. So, can you all please mute your mic? There's a little bit of background noise. Yeah, thank you so much. So Okay. Right. I've just selected this connector here. So wherever I am hovering my mouse, the cursor. So I've selected this connector tool and just connecting the symbol. So or while creating itself, you can create directly. You don't need to do this one. While creating itself, there is an option. So if you hover your mouse here, where you are seeing the arrow mark, so you can directly connect to a different symbol the way you want. That arrow, I'm not seeing that arrow. Yeah, so this one, right? If you can directly like connect to this one, any other symbol directly while creating itself, you don't need to do it again here. So if you go to this arrow mark, so you can connect to this one, you can connect to any of the symbol. But here we are not. We have already created the diagram. Okay. All right. So okay. Right. All right. So yeah. So we have connected few things, but this is not the complete thing. Every decision box will have two flows. When the decision is correct, that's one flow. When the decision is wrong, there is another flow. Or the condition is true, there is one flow, and the condition is false, there is another flow. So is the entered pin correct? So if it is yes, we have this particular flow that is defined. If the entered pin is wrong, you have this particular flow that is defined. So are the number of atoms greater than 3? If yes, you have this flow. What if it is no? Okay. In that case, if the number of atoms are less than or equal to 3, we'd be re-entering the pin. So in that case, we need to connect to this one. We need to re-enter the pin. So again, because the validation will happen again, the moment you re-enter the pin, the system will validate whether the entered pin is correct. And again, the subsequent steps will follow. So let me first do another thing here. So whether the condition is true or false, we need to make sure we need to mention that. Is the entered pin correct? If it is true, I will put it as S. If it is false, it is no. If the are the number of atoms are greater than 3, if it is yes, so you have this flow. All that I am doing is I am double clicking here. I am not doing anything special. If it is not, if the number of atoms are less than or equal to 3, you will be able to re-enter the pin again. Then here, every condition will have two flows, right? So here we have two flows. If the entered amount is greater than available balance, yes, so you will get a message saying that insufficient funds because you entered more amount than what you have in your bank account. If it is not, so you have this flow. Okay, so let's quickly go back and see what we have created. So start or the end of the program. So we have this symbol, and the user would insert the card, and once inserting the card, enter the pin, and the system will validate whether the details are correct in the database. The card details and pin details are correct in the database. So it will check. If it is S, then it will have this particular flow. If it is not, you have like the system will start counting. How the system will start counting? Initially, the count is equal to 0. Initially, the count is set to 0. The moment you try for the first time, count is equal to count plus 1. So obviously, initially the count is 0, 0 plus 1. So after first wrong attempt, your count becomes 1. So it will check whether 1 is greater than 3. No. So then it will ask you to re-enter the pin. So second time you enter, so still it is wrong. Then what will happen? Count is equal to count plus 1. Now your count is reset to 1. So 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Is 2 greater than 3? No. Then it will ask you to re-enter the pin. Similarly, like it will again you tried entering wrong pin, so then it will the increment by 1. Count is equal to count plus 1. So this time count is 2. 2 plus 1 is equal to 3. Is 3 greater than 3? No. So it will ask you to re-enter the pin. Next time it becomes 4. 4 greater than 3? Yes. Then you get a message that your card is blocked. You cannot basically transact anymore. You should reach out to the nearest branch for unblock process. Something of that sort. You will get a message. That's how account function would be working internally. So this is a basic logic, without which the ATM machine will not work. So all these things should be like all these decisions are kind of thing where all the conditional boxes are decisions where the validation is happening, where the business validation is happening. So that's why these condition boxes are very important. Without which the system itself will not work. Without these conditions itself, it will not work. It will not work the way we want. So that's about okay. So is the entered pin correct? So if yes, if not, so obviously it will check for the number of attempts. So then your card gets blocked if the number of attempts more than 3. Wrong attempts more than 3. If it is yes, if the entered pin is correct, so then it goes to the all the options where the user is interested in cash withdrawal process. Click on cash withdrawal and enter the amount. Enter the amount. Is the entered amount greater than available balance? Then dispense the cash. Sorry, if it is greater than available balance, then it will give you a message saying that insufficient funds. If it is not, then dispense the cash and collect the card. With that, the process comes to an end. So that's how you have complete end-to-end process that's defined here. So any questions with regards to this workflow?
Can I ask a question? Like, is it in is the user point of view, or because the ATM machine for ATM machine it first validate when we insert a card, the ATM machine first validate the card. Is it the so
It's basic flow from the yes. Obviously, the card is a valid one or not. That validation will happen. It is from the user perspective. Okay. So the system reads and validates that particular card. Only then it will go to the next step. Only then, if after inserting card, it will go to the next step. Okay.
okay? Okay, thank you.
All right. The whole idea here is so we should get used to this particular tool, the Microsoft Visio. Please try to check online. So if you have these tools available online, it should be there actually. It should be there. You can try downloading that. If not, you let me know. I have 2007 version download the installation thing, but that was the older version. So if you wish to continue with that, I can probably share with you the 2007 version, the Microsoft Visio one. So the other purpose is we would be using these things as part of our documentation, this flowchart. So obviously, if I have to understand a workflow that is followed in an organization, so I would talk to them. I would understand from the stakeholders how their business is working. Based on that, I will be able to create a flow chart of the things that this is the workflow that they are following. Like for if they initiate a particular transaction, these are all the different steps that are followed subsequently. And once all these things are done, the transaction gets completed. So that's a kind of initial understanding of how the business is going to work. Or if I developed a system and I want to define a process in which from one system to other system, how the workflow should happen. So that's when also I can use a flowchart. So all that this is used as part of our requirement documentation. So that's the second idea. So the first is like we should get used to this tool and understand how it works. And apart from that, so we should also these things are very important in documenting our set of requirements. Now we would go ahead and we try understanding with regards to the recruitment process, the HR recruitment, I would not say HR, with regards to the recruitment process in an organization, what are all the steps that we follow? And who would be initiating a resource requirement? And once it gets initiated, so what are all the different stages it passes through before it is getting, I mean, the before onboarding a resource in the organization? So let's take an example of an IT organization. Let's take an example of an IT organization. We'll try to understand how the recruitment process works. So let's first try to understand the sequence of steps. So I would need your participation for this. So who would be initiating a resource requirement in the organization? How do we get to know that there is a resource needed and all that? Who would be initiating it?
Project
So any
manager of
questions, Dr. Fun? Okay, project manager. Okay, project manager. Identifies the resource requirement. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, all right. So once the project manager identifies the resource requirements, what do they do? So how the project manager will identify, first of all, how do they get to know that, okay, or how, obviously, like how they plan it?
sometime when we start a project or for our ongoing project, maybe there's some resource left or some resource needs for that project or for some particular
Mm-hmm.
work, some resource which is not available currently in that team. So by that, project manager can identify that we need this kind of resource for
Okay.
our.
Okay. So obviously the project manager is responsible for the budget, utilizing the budgets for the team, and also
Yes,
they know that the resource need for the team. So based on that, they will identify a resource requirement for the
yes,
team. So if at all, if
yes,
it is a new project, once the project manager is identified for that project, they will start doing the similar things. They will start identifying how many developers are required, how many BA people are required, how many testers are required. They'll start identifying the same based on the budgets that are there for them. Okay, so project manager identifies the resource requirement. What do they do once they identify?
they will talk
So
with
what
the
they will?
HR person that we need the resource.
Uh-huh. Okay, all right. So I'm formalizing this one. Create the proposal form. Create the proposal form. So obviously the resource requirement goes to the proposal form and send it to HR. Mute your mic, the background noise. Sorry for that. Okay, create the proposal form and send it to the HR. So obviously the HR is the one who would be managing the resource recruitment process and so on. So for that, like HR, the project manager would be sending a proposal form to the HR team. Okay. So what does HR will do? Now once they get a proposal from the project manager for their team, so what do? They'll start
So
looking for the, yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
yeah, HR will create the job profile and start looking for the job. They will submit the job profile to different job portal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what are all the different channels we have for recruitment? Let's say I have a requirement for my project. So I have tried reaching out to my HR. So what are all the different ways they can start looking for the resources?
So first they will create the job profile and looking for the resources internally if any resources left there in business or not. First they're looking for the resource from there internally in the
Okay.
company. So if they
Okay.
not get resource from there, yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so there are multiple alternatives that they would be looking at. The first and foremost thing, uh, as she communicated, so would be looking at the internal resources, right? So obviously, internally you have like large pool of resources in most of the cases. If not, obviously there is other channels anyway. So the first and foremost thing is look at the internal resources internally, if there is anyone who has the skill set and who can fit into this particular role. So that means that HR would look out for the internal resources. So first thing is HR post the job internally. So nowadays it's very much encouraged. So instead of going outside the organization for recruitment process, so they are encouraged to look at the internal people. HR posts the job internally. So when they post it, obviously, whoever has interest in looking out for the change, they can apply for that. And based on again, there is a minimal standard process that needs to be followed between two project managers because that person may be part of the different team has to move to a different team. Obviously, there should be a movement of resource, so that needs approvals and so on. So, and there is some kind of already the interview process, formal interview process that will be there. So that way, HR would be posting the job internally. So that's one thing. If at all, if they don't get the resources, the required resource internally, what do they do? What is the next channel that they have? So, what would be the next alternative? They would look out for the profiles in the database. Looks for the profiles in the database. Look for the profiles in the database. HR looks for the profiles in the database. So how do you get the profiles in the database? How do we get the profiles in our database? This is organizational database. We have not yet reached out to the external organizations or we haven't posted yet. So how do we get the profiles in the database?
From the employee database, I guess the companies, every company has their employee database. So it has all the
That is
detail
anyways,
about.
that is first case, right? That is like we are looking out for our internal employees. That's the first case.
There will
From
be
the job
candidates
portals.
who are not selected in the previous interview, but their
Yes,
database is recorded
yes,
and saved.
yes, yes. So if they are not selected, that's one case. The second is there is something called as employee referral process. The organization spend a lot of money in the employee referral process. That's one of the ways they try getting potential resources. I can refer any of my friends or ex-colleagues whom I think are having the potential. I can refer to my organization. They would be happy to conduct interview and if at all there is an opening. Because rather than paying for the external teams and it's a huge cost for them, so rather like you can pay to your employee as a bonus or whatever, as employee referral bonus or something of that sort. So the organizations are encouraging that part. So obviously when I refer any of my friends, so their profile will be there in the database at least for next 1 to 2 years. So whenever there is a resource requirement for a particular technology or whatever, could you please mute yourself? Still hearing background noise. Okay, so whenever there is a resource requirement for a particular project, then obviously then so by checking in the database, you can basically send an email notification to the respective people. So if at all, if you don't get the resource in the database also, because if you see some of the service-based companies, they have I would say thousands and thousands of profiles in their employee referral database. Employee referral database. Though they clean it up every yearly once or 2 years one, so they still have a lot of like huge database of the like candidates. So then profiles in the database, that is one thing. The next thing is, if at all, if the profiles are not matching, so HR would be looking at, would be posting the job externally. Post the job externally. Externally in the sense, there are a number of channels again. Newspapers, that's one way, are leading like job portals, Indeed, etc. Job portals. And then finally, like you have the recruitment agencies. So who does the recruitment activity? HR would be posting the job internally. So subsequent to it, based on the suitability of the candidate, then it will go through the recruitment process, like a formal recruitment process. So we will look into it, and we will see the complete workflow, and we try to put it in the form of a flow chart. The idea here is not just to create the flow chart or anything. The idea here is to understand a case, understand a problem statement, and come up with a solution approach. And then we try identifying who all the people who would be using the system and what is their purpose of using the system. We'll try identifying that, and for that to happen, the first and foremost thing, we need to create a complete flow chart of the recruitment process from end to end, from the time the resource requirement is initiated till we onboard the candidate. What all the steps that needs to be followed. So based on that, we will talk about a case study. Is that clear? So with that, I'm going to stop here for today. Any questions? Anything?
So I just have one question regarding the flow chart. So does the
Mhm.
flow chart can represent the dependency of a system, or is just display the flow of the system?
No, it just defines the flow of the system. You can probably mention that, like, so the dependency cannot be defined, at least like you need to create two different flow chart. Basically, it's either process flow diagram or a workflow diagram. So it doesn't show the dependency of one system on the other. No.
Okay, okay, okay.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.